People tend to romanticize the life of a park ranger. They envision us basking in the glory of nature, surrounded by picturesque vistas and charming wildlife. Well, let me set the record straight. Sure, there are days of tranquility and peace, but it's not all postcard-perfect scenes. The job comes with its fair share of eerie shadows and spine-tingling mysteries, especially if you're like me, with a curiosity that tends to bite back. A few years back, during my tenure as a ranger, I began to notice something peculiar within our park. Nestled away from the beaten paths and the well-trodden trails, about 2 miles deep into the forest, was an ancient-looking building. It was a decrepit structure, hidden under a blanket of thick overgrowth, surrounded by a rusty barbed wire fence. The building was conspicuously absent from any of our official maps, and trust me, I checked them all. This enigma was a splinter in my mind, nagging me with its existence. Eager for answers, I brought up the topic with my fellow rangers. I expected them to share my curiosity, my concern, but all I received were dismissive shrugs. Their casual responses echoed the same sentiment. "Don't trouble yourself over it," they'd advise. "Leave it alone." But their indifference clashed with my nature. I've always been the kind of guy who dives headfirst into mysteries, relishing the thrill of the unknown, and this cryptic building was a riddle I couldn't ignore. My intrigue escalated to an all-time high one moonless night. While I was on patrol, following the same route I'd taken 100 times before, something unusual caught my eye. A behemoth of a tractor trailer, pitch black and intimidating, rolled up to the mysterious building. 4 figures, their features hidden under heavy, dark clothing, exited the vehicle. They busied themselves unloading an unknown cargo into the back of the building. The sight was as intriguing as it was suspicious, but the distance and darkness made it impossible to discern what they were transporting. My curiosity was stirred into a frenzied whirlpool, the mystery deepening with each passing moment. The next morning, I attempted to broach the subject with the senior ranger, hoping that he, with his years of experience, would shed some light on the matter. Yet, much to my dismay, he brushed off my concerns, chalking it up to an overactive imagination. His words were a proverbial slap to my face, a cold dismissal of my instincts. But that didn't discourage me. If anything, it steeled my resolve. I wanted answers, and I was hell-bent on finding them. Weeks turned into months, and my vigilance over that forsaken building didn't waver. More suspicious activities, more covert meetings under the cloak of night. The more I tried to unearth the truth, the more hostility I faced from my superiors. It reached a boiling point when they presented me with an ultimatum: abandon my investigation or face severe consequences. You see, I'm not the kind of man who can be bullied into submission. My curiosity, my innate desire for justice, they were forces I couldn't ignore. But my tenacity came at a steep price. I was fired, stripped of my ranger's badge, my years of faithful service disregarded without a second thought. If given the chance, though, I wouldn't change a thing. There are things in this world that outweigh the security of a job, and to me, uncovering the truth behind that isolated building was one of them. Today, I'm no longer a park ranger. The uniform is gone, but the spirit remains. This mystery, it's far from solved. It's not over, not by a long shot. I may not know what's happening in that forsaken building, but I'll unearth its secrets. I owe it to myself and to the park I once dedicated my life to safeguard. So here's to hoping luck is on my side. And if you don't hear from me again, well, just know that I've stumbled onto something I was never meant to discover. I didn't close my coffee shop because the business was failing. I didn't close it because my customers left or because the bakery section got a bad reputation. Nothing like that happened. I was successful, honestly. I was happy and successful, a combination that I thought was impossible for a very long time. You've got a shop like mine in U-Town too, I bet. The local coffee place the college kids go to. They all swear it's better than the big brand's coffee, even though the truth is they just like the quiet atmosphere. Every town's got one. Except for ours, I guess. You see, my shop stopped being about coffee. If I was within 3 blocks of that building, all I could think about was the thing I saw out back, the thing in the dumpster, the thing that started as a man but quickly became something else. I closed up alone most nights. The shop would shut down for 4 hours before the baker came in to prep that morning's menu. I'd come back around dawn and business would start soon thereafter. This particular night, I'd gathered up the trash and was headed out back to the dumpster. It was my last task before locking up. When I saw the black lid was thrown back, I suspected the worst. Well, it had been the worst up until that point. The local homeless would sometimes rummage through our trash, searching for anything of value. I didn't blame them necessarily, but we didn't throw out much food, and we didn't throw out recyclables, so their searching was more often a nuisance than it was rewarding. Regardless of whether or not I offered them a cup of coffee, they never took the eviction well. When I heard something rummaging inside of the industrial-sized green metal frame, I prepared myself for that conversation. "Hey!" I called out. "There's better stuff inside!" Instead of responding, whoever was ducking inside the dumpster went quiet. They went still, as if I wouldn't eventually see them as I approached the structure. The closer I got, the more I realized how bad they were at hiding. I could still them breathing, heavy and labored. It sounded like something was obstructing their airway. Maybe they were sick. I didn't know. The low rumble of their breath did make me slow down, though. When I was finally close enough to see over the lip of the dumpster, I was more nervous than anything. I did my part to help the people in my community, but I wasn't eager to get sick myself. Right before I looked over the edge, the stranger reached out. A human-like hand, 4 fingers and 1 thumb, curled over the lip of the dumpster. The nails were long and dark, even in the poor nighttime light. Hair curled on the man's wrist and ran down to his knuckles. Although the fingers were bare, they looked swollen and inflamed. The coloration on his nails made me guess that they were infected somehow. I backed up. I stopped talking. Suddenly, the garbage in my hands wasn't terribly important. The next to rise over the edge of that dumpster wasn't the disease-ridden face I was expecting. I watched as the head of a dog climbed into sight. It didn't make sense, but that's what it was. A dog's head at the top of this thing's hairy shoulders. Its maw was long. Yellow teeth peeped out from between its curled lips. Its ears were tall like a wolf's or a fox's, and they were both pinned back against its head. I couldn't understand what it was. I still can't wrap my head around it. Not really. I just know in that moment, I was the smallest thing on the face of the planet, and I was standing in the path of a giant. It climbed one leg after another out of the dumpster and hopped to the ground. It tripped, fell onto its side with a nearly comical display of clumsiness. It was thin, starving probably. That explained the look in its eyes, too. But I couldn't expect it to be weak or slow, even with starvation holding it back. It was taller than me by nearly 2 feet. I could imagine how long its stride was and how quickly it could move. It dropped onto all 4s instead of standing upright. I couldn't outrun something like that, but I didn't want to stand there and face it either. I dropped the trash, splitting open one of the bags, and turned to flee back into the building. I heard the creature leap forward. I grit my teeth, expecting its fangs to sink into my back. That didn't happen. I reached the door safely, ducked inside, and locked it shut. Looking out the window, I could still see it. It was sniffing through the trash bag, chewing on a discarded paper cup. I was wrong, I realized. Starvation had saved me. Chewing its way through the trash was a lot easier than coming after me. I called both the police and animal control. Only animal control agreed to investigate the scene. By the time I could hear their tires rolling down the street, the monster was gone. Its ears had perked up long before mine. It glanced briefly at the window I was staring through, and then it disappeared. It ran off, disappearing somewhere in town. They told me it was a bear or a dog that I'd seen. I wasn't in any state to argue with them, but I know that wasn't some ordinary animal, and I couldn't get it out of my mind after that. So the coffee shop had to go. I don't tell this story often either. It isn't something I enjoy sharing. But please, if you hear something unseen rummaging through your trash, maybe investigate those sounds with more than garbage in your hands. Skinwalkers are shapeshifters. They can turn into any animal they want to, which is why it's so hard to believe in them. The main idea of this creature is to be feared for what they may or may not do. Little is known about these creatures, but many stories are told around the Southwest states here in the United States. One particular incident was told to me by my own great-grandmother. It was an experience she had when she was 11 or 12, in the early 1930s. She said that it was during the Great Depression, which, as you would imagine, was a very depressing time. She was helping her father on the farm, lifting bales of hay and feeding the cattle. She said her feet had blisters and her hands had sores from all the physical labor. If only kids today knew. She told me it was around 4 p.m. in the summer. Her father was already back inside getting ready for dinner, and she was still outside. She was pretty irritated that all her brothers had gone back in. That's when something strange happened. The sun began to get really small in the sky, and it grew bigger and eventually disappeared behind the clouds. This left the sky very gray, and she began to fear for herself. The next thing, one of the cattle beside her began going crazy, running around and roaring, greatly agitated. It scared the heck out of her. She had no experience calming animals. The next thing she said, the cow ran behind some bushes, then emerged as a sheep, but covered in blood and with the face of a wolf. My great-grandmother told me she stood there absolutely petrified watching this sheep emerge, but not a sheep, something else, something dark and demonic. I remember she broke down as she explained her story even all these years later. My great-grandmother, now nearing 90, reliving such a trauma from many years before. It was deeply moving. It showed me that trauma and pain never leave our memory. She explained that the sheep continued running around the field, scaring the cattle, maiming several of them. It looked totally crazed and bloodthirsty. The next thing she told me was that her own father came out with the family shotgun and attempted to shoot the sheep, but it disappeared behind the bushes, never coming out. When they checked the bushes, nothing was there except some dried blood and wool. My great-grandmother said her father moved the entire family after the incident and regularly used blessed salt and holy water all over the farm. My great-grandmother was very into supernatural and paranormal events. She did a great deal of research on the incident and is convinced she saw a shapeshifter. I mean, it would make a lot of sense, as many of the characteristics of shapeshifters are fulfilled in my great-grandmother's description. This story has fascinated me from childhood to the age of 35 today. I feel compelled to put pen to paper and share this recollection of my great-grandmother's tale with as many people as possible. I feel I owe it to her. No child deserved to see such horror. That is what my great-grandmother saw. So if you are reading this, please tell me something about them. Have they always existed? How do we get rid of them? What do they do? What are they capable of? Are they all evil? I mean, are there good shapeshifters? I have so many questions, but I am committed to researching this, and I hope you can provide me with many answers. If not for me, then for my great-grandmother. Thank you for reading. I'm a hobbyist and a paranormal investigator. I wanted to take some time and share with you an encounter story that I've recently come to know from a man in the state of Alabama. This man had an encounter near his home. He claims it was a reptilian that he said was about 10 feet tall, and it left 3 claw marks on the hood of his truck in a fierce showdown. It apparently tried to kill the man but was unsuccessful. He, however, was successful in getting away. What made this the scariest of all is that there were other witnesses to this strange event. The descriptions given by the two who saw the same thing as the man were the same. The two witnesses were his wife and older son. They were all terrified by what he saw that afternoon. He claimed that this thing climbed right out of the swamps and went right for him. They kind of had a brawl, and he shot at this thing multiple times, trying to get it to go away. The man deeply admitted to being terrified of what he saw, and if this thing wanted to kill him, it could have easily done so. This reptilian cryptid, as described by the witnesses, was around 10 feet tall, grayish to green scaly skinned, sharp teeth in its mouth, large hands with 3 claws each, and long protruding spikes all over its back with a long tail covered in barbs or thorns. Its eyes were red with yellow-like slits for pupils. It looked extremely angry. The thing was supposedly able to climb trees and also walked around on 2 legs like a man would, very comfortably. The witness says that the thing had a horrible, sickening smell that emitted from it. You could smell it before it even showed up. It smelled bad. The mom and son just kept saying how horrible the smell was, and they are praying to never have another encounter with whatever this was. The witness was so terrified after the incident that he and his family moved away from the area. The family now lives in northern Florida with their relatives in order to avoid that property and area altogether. When I spoke to the witness, he claimed there are a lot of swamplands that surrounded that specific county. Also, lots of deer, lots of hunting. He said the surrounding county is very rural and a lot of people like to hunt there. He now prefers living in northern Florida. He doesn't want another reptilian encounter experience. He doesn't want to be that close to those swamps ever again, especially after his family had their very first and hopefully only encounter. The man also wants to be clear that what he saw was not a human in a suit, but something else. Something dark, something from another world. When they were definitely being attacked, he also admits that he got a look at the creature. The man said that his wife described it exactly the way he did. It was hideous. She was hiding inside, afraid of what might happen if she stepped outside and was unsure of what to do. She said she also smelled a foul odor before she ever saw the creature. And even when she saw it, and after it disappeared, her description of its claws was identical to her husband's description. She described them as 3 claws that resembled retractable knives coming out of each hand. It was also reported to have been making a loud shrieking noise as it approached. She said her husband is lucky that this thing let him get away. If anyone else has had a sighting or an encounter story that you know regarding something like this, I'd appreciate any information you could share with me. Because here, there is something very strange going on. And because we don't have photographic evidence, at least not yet, we won't be able to prove this thing exists, which we're wanting to do. So if you ever come across this thing, please don't hesitate to share it here so I can know more. Thank you. Being a ranger isn't always easy. Sure, I get to see some of the most beautiful scenery in the country and talk to people from all walks of life. In addition, it is a great career for someone like me who just loves being outdoors. However, dealing with those who are uninformed and do not understand the park rules or how our park society actually works can be difficult at times. And a lot of them don't even realize that the rules are there to protect them from things they couldn't even imagine. I once read something on a Reddit thread about how Stephen King must have had a park ranger on retainer to get story ideas. While I highly doubt that it is true, we do see stuff that I bet most horror writers couldn't even dream of. One thing that never fails to freak me out, no matter how many times it happens, and it is way more often than you would think, is when you come across something that has absolutely no right to be there, and you have no clue how it could have possibly gotten there. Staircases being discovered, okay, you might think at some point there must have been a building many years ago, and all that's left is the stairs. The only issue being that the trees surrounding the structure are hundreds of years old, and the stairs are not. So there couldn't possibly have been any building there, and none of the trees are damaged, and there is no route or trail leading up to the area for some big-time practical joker to plant it there for some YouTube show. They're just there. The same with abandoned cars. They appear in areas that have been looked at many times before, maybe on foot or with an ARV, but again there is no way a truck, camper van, etc. could have gotten there. Yet we find them sometimes in a state of decay, showing the vehicle had been there for years, when in reality, that area had been checked and reported back on only a few days ago. Sometimes when we check, the vehicles are registered to people who have been missing for years. Other times, they just don't seem to exist in the system. And once in a while, we find a person, sometimes alive, other times just a body. Sometimes they actually are hikers or hunters who've lost their way, and other times they are not. We have found people wandering around in places that had been checked only a few hours before, looking like they've been lost for days. When we finally manage to convince them that we are the good guys and want to help, we find that they've been missing for days and weeks and are not even from the US, let alone this area. The scariest part is that they have no idea how they got there. These are ordinary people who, at one moment, are sitting at a desk in Germany. The next thing you know, it's 3 weeks later and they're here in America, having no idea how they ended up here. You won't find these sorts of reports on your local news, so don't bother looking. We take them straight to a government building and, well, they deal with it. So next time you are hiking and you've been doing it for years, and a ranger tells you not to go somewhere, or you're hunting, and they tell you to avoid a certain area, do what they say. We are not being a pain and trying to ruin your day. We are looking after you because something is out there, dumping bodies, cars, even people into our forests and parks. If something or someone is doing that, then maybe, just maybe, they are also taking things. And the hikers that go missing, just maybe they were not dragged off by a bear or fell down a ravine and were eaten. Maybe they'll turn up somewhere in the middle of the desert in another country, and that country's government will come along and deal with them. And from what I've seen from the few moments I've spent in the company of one of those people, you do not want that to be you.